Hi and welcome back to another video. Today's video is about a solar system we did sometime in June this year. So I must say this was quite an interesting project. So without not talking further, let's just go ahead and get into the video. So sometime last year, that was in 2024, this particular client got in touch about a solar system he wanted to have installed for his house. So prior to that, he had already purchased two pieces of 10 kVA two-phases inverters. So those were two inverters. And as of then, he was in the US, so he contacted me that he had purchased these inverters and he wanted to have them installed for his house. So I'm sure by then he'd, quite educated himself with some information with regard to solar system. So once he got in touch, I requested to, go see the building or the house where he intends to have the solar system installed for, and then do a little bit of assessment. So I went there, and I must say the house was massive. Yeah, it was quite massive. So aside, the house being massive, the roof was, quite of has an interesting design. As part of that, also it was a bit, in terms of the slope was quite sharp. So I had to take all these things into consideration, especially when it gets to a point where we're going to do the installation. So during then, that was as of last year, I did a design for the solar system for the house, and he requested to purchase the materials by himself, which is also a good way to go about it. So I sent him the list of the materials he was going to use. Especially during this part, I had to take into consideration the size of the roof and how the panels were going to be oriented on it, as well as where the sun also rises from, also sets, and all those things. So I had to take all those things into consideration with regard to this project. So I give him the things that were going to be required for this installation. So as of then, the size of panels that we could get was 475 watt panel. So he decided to buy, I think, quite about maybe 28, I think about 30 something pieces, but he wanted to have 27 pieces used for his home, and then the rest was for different projects. So that was purchased. Aside that was the rails. Aside the rails, you have the cables, and then some few other accessories such as the breakers, the breaker boxes, among others. So all these things were bought, that was sometime last year. But unfortunately, we couldn't proceed with the installation because the inverter was with him back then in the US, and then also the battery that was required for the installation, he was yet to purchase them. So we waited till this year, that was in June, where everything was set. So for this system, he bought everything from China. So the inverter, that's 10 kVA, two pieces of that, and then for the batteries, 15 kilowatts, three pieces of that, so giving a total of 45 kilowatts for the battery. And then the panels were bought here in Ghana, as well as all the other accessories that was needed. So prior to doing the installation itself, I had to pay a visit one of the days to inspect all the materials that were available, and to see if there was some few other things that were missing or that would be needed for the installation. So I did that. That was, I think, on the Monday during the week where we did the installation. We took a total of about 5 days, or no, 4 days to do the installation. But we went by on the Monday to do all the necessary assessment to make sure everything is set. And then once, that was done, there were a few more things that we needed to buy in addition to what was already there, such as the clamps, some few other MC4 connectors, and then a few other things. So that was done. And for this installation, I had to plan properly for it. Yes, so planning meant that, you know, how you're going to go about the installation of the panels, the rails, the cable, you know, routing, the inverter itself, where you're going to install it and all that. Yeah. Before all this, because last year I had done assessment on all these things, so actually we had a plan on how we're going to go about it. So for the house, unfortunately, there wasn't a utility room which was created for, especially for this system. So there was a need to install the system in the garage of the house. So that was well noted. So that also helped in terms of the quantity of cables that was going to be, you know, required for the whole project. The cables, that is both the DC cables as well as the AC cables. So yeah, the D-Day came, but prior to the D-Day, I had to, you know, plan for the execution of the project. So I had to put together a team of 6 people, including myself, where we had one group which comprised of 3 people working on the panels, with you know, or working on the panels on the roof, and then another group working on the setup for the inverter and then all the other accessories. So yeah, I must say one of the difficult part of, you know, setting up a solar system usually will have to be the installation of the panels, especially when you're not lucky and you come by a very sharp roof, especially similar to what we had to deal with for this particular project. Then yeah, it takes you know, a bit of, you know, you have to be very cautious about how you're going to go about the execution, especially taking into consideration safety, so that, you know, you don't complete the project with any form of accidents. Yeah, so that was one of the things that we took into consideration. So we had a team of 3 who were taking care of the panels installation. So the total quantity we were installing were 27 pieces, and because we had 2 inverters, so there was a need to split this into 2 equal parts. Unfortunately, 27 cannot give you 2 equal parts. Yes, each inverter has 2 or had 2 MPPT charge controllers. So then that meant that we could have a group of 2 for one inverter, another group of 2 for one inverter. Now, because of the quantity of panels that we have, or we had to work with, which was odd, 27 pieces, we had to do the array, set the arrays of the panels in 7. So 7 in series each, that is for 2, giving us 14. And then you're now left with 13 to work with. So then another set in 7, and then the last set was in 6. This is not bad to go with, especially because the difference between 7 and 6 isn't so much wide in terms of when you calculate the wattage for the panel. So that was okay to go with. So the Tuesday, that was when we started the installation. We had the 3 groups started off with the rails. So for the rails, mounting of the rails, it's actually the difficult part, especially when it comes to the you know, mounting of the panel. So you have to first mount the rails. And yeah, so by so doing, we had to, you know, have body harness for the 2 guys who were on top of the roof. There was one assistant down who was helping, you know, carrying the panels for them. Yes, and for this also, we're quite fortunate because there was a water tank at the back, water tank platform at the back of the house, which we could use as a platform to get to the top. Initially, we were supposed to go with a scaffold, but the front part of the house was quite high. Although the scaffold would have done the job, it would have been a bit difficult, you know, getting the panels up there. But yeah, so we went through the back, get to the top, had a body harness on. Because we didn't have like something that we could tie the body harness to on the top, we had to tie it to the water tank platform that we had by the help of, you know, using some ropes, safety ropes. Yes, and then so one person was, you know, actually holding on to the rope, and then the other person was, you know, working on installing the panels. Yeah, so that was a means of safety measure that we put in place, especially with regard to the installation of the rails for the panel. So that kicked off with the installation of the panels, and I must say it took 4 days to finish the panels installation. You may ask why. So why? Because one of the days did rain, which made the roof very slippery, so we couldn't proceed with the installation during that particular day. So that day we couldn't do any work, especially with regard to the panels. Yeah, so that was how come it took 4 days to do the installation of the panels. So as I said, we did our arrangement of that is in series, 7 in series each, 3 of that, and then we had 1 6 in series. So we had a total of that was going to be So 8 cables coming because we have positive and negative for each of the arrays. So we had a total of 8 cables which were routed down from the panels. Then whilst the panels installation was ongoing, then myself and the other team, we were taking care of the mounting of the inverters. So we had 2 inverters to work with, 10 kVA each, 2-phase inverters. And one interesting thing is that, was that for the house, they were using a 3-phase system from the grid. So, and interestingly, you have a 2-phase inverter you have to work with. There are a couple of ways we could go about installing that, but what we decided to do, because we had a 2-phase system, was that we then switched the house from a 3-phase system to a 2-phase system. And prior to that, you have to consult the owner, and he even attested to the fact that he wasn't even utilizing the 3-phase system that he had, so that wasn't going to be a problem. So that meant that the 3 cables or the 4 cables coming from the grid, that is, we have 3 lines, live lines, and then 1 neutral. We're going to take out one of the live lines, and then we're going to split the neutrals into 2. So we have separate, sort of like a separate 2-phase system, because the building was a story building. I think it was 2-story building. Was it 2 or 3-story? I'll say 3-story building. But yeah, so we had a ground floor, then the first floor, and then the last floor. So for the wiring for the house, the first floor and then the last floor was, you know, wired together. So they had a separate distribution board, and then the ground floor was also having its own distribution board that was on the ground floor. So yeah, so that meant our 2-phase system was going to, you know, be easier to go about. And as part of some of these installations, it's always best to have an electrician as part of the team, so that in case you are faced with some of these things that will have to be done, it's easier for it to be taken care of. So for all solar systems that we, you know, work on, we always have an electrician as part of the system, as part of the team. So when we come by complex or complicated installation systems, or complicated electrical parts that will have to be taken care of, the electrician is able to, you know, take care of that. Although solar system is, you know, produces energy, that's direct energy, DC energy, as against alternate current. So there's quite, you know, some differences to how they work, although they are, you know, both producing energy. Yeah, so that was done as part of the installation. We had to split that into 2 different phases, and then went ahead with the installation of the inverter. So we mounted the inverters, and then also we had to pass our trunking, because they didn't make provision for solar system, you know, when we were doing the wiring of the house. Else they would have passed all the pipes, necessary pipes, to where the inverters or the system was going to be installed. In this case, the system was being installed in the garage, and then right from the garage, once you take the entrance into the house from the garage, the left part of it, or of the wall, was where they have the distribution board for the ground floor, and then also the changeover system which was there. So yeah, so it meant that we're going to route our cable from the inverters through the wall all the way through to that particular point. So that was what we did. Yeah, so I must say, as and then all the materials we needed was bought. The DC cables were present, the AC cables were also present. So for this, the AC cables were 16 mm. That was what we're working with, and then the DC cables, I think, was 6 mm. 1x6 mm cable. That was what we used for the installation. So we routed the cables, the 16 mm cables, from the inverter to the distribution board, and then also from the distribution board to the inverter. So let me explain. Yeah, so from the inverter to the distribution board is basically the AC output. So once the inverter generates, or the energy generated from the panels comes to the inverter, or from the battery comes to the inverter, it has to go out to the house. So that was from the inverter then to the distribution board. And then also we had to route cable from the distribution board, that is the AC input, from the distribution board to the inverter. So that was going to serve as a means to help with the hybrid system. So the inverter was a hybrid inverter. It could work both off-grid and on-grid. So off-grid in the sense that it could function separately without no battery. It could work with just the panels by producing energy. It wouldn't store any energy, so it produces energy and then it passes those energy directly to the house. So that was how the inverter was. But of course, there was a battery as part of their system, so that needed to be configured as part of their system. So we had cables routed to the distribution board, and then from the distribution board to the inverter. So because we had two inverters working, and it was two-phase we were working with, so it meant that for every inverter you have two-phase. So you have one. For this particular inverter, I was quite interested with how their two-phase was. It was independent phases. It wasn't like together. So it had one live cable, and then another neutral cable, and then another live cable, and then a neutral cable. So that was 4 cables for that one inverter, and then another 4 cables for another inverter, making a total of 8 cables. That is just for the AC output. However, for the AC input, it was just single phase. So that was additional 2 cables for one inverter, and then another 2 cables for the other inverter. So making a total of, that was like 8 plus 4, that makes 12 cables. So that was 12 cables, and then you also have to include the earth cable or the earthing cable as part of it. We always try our possible best to include that in all installations that we do, because that is the right process. So one thing also I must say is that this system that we're working on wasn't something I'd worked with before, especially the brand of inverters as well as the battery. But one good thing about solar system is that the concept is pretty much the same, carrying or going across. There might be some slight differences with the brand specific, but aside that, you know, the process or the concept is usually the same. And also one thing is that it's always good to always go through the manual of the inverter, so that you get yourself familiar with the processes or what you're supposed to do. Because the fact that you've worked on solar systems before in the past doesn't mean that it is the same thing for all systems. Yes, so the manuals always help. Yes, so I had to, you know, familiarize myself with the manual for both the inverters as well as that of the battery, to know how to go about the configuration. And then also for the system, the installation is usually in 2 parts, where you do the hard part, where you have to, you know, mount the devices, you route your cables among the others, and then you come to the next part where you have to do the actual configuration on the inverter itself, so as to be able to tell the kind of battery you're using, the kind of current you want the system to charge at, the kind of voltage you want, you know, as output for the house or the system, among other things. Yeah, so the first part was where we had to mount the inverter itself. As part of mounting the inverter, we also had to mount the breaker boxes. So we mounted 2 different breaker boxes, one for the left inverter, one for the right inverter. And I must say also, for this particular inverter, usually when you have like 2 inverters, it means that you're going to be putting them together to serve as like one system. Unfortunately for this system, it couldn't be paralleled. Yes, that was also an interesting thing that was part of the installation. So what procedure we derived was that, okay, as part of for this installation, we're going to use one inverter for one of the floors, that was the ground floor, and then the other inverter for the 2 floors, that was the top floor. And per the load calculation, the ground floor had most of the load. So you had the TVs, air conditioners, fridges, among other things, you know, all on the ground floor. And then the top floor was basically where, you know, they had rooms where they could, you know, they do sleep. And so they didn't really consume so much on the top floors as against the ground floor. So also when it came to the batteries, it meant that we had to put 2 batteries together for one floor, that was the ground floor, or one inverter, which was serving one floor, and then put or allocate the other battery, which was a single battery, for another inverter, which was serving the other floors. That was how we went about the system. So in your video, you might see the 2 inverters, one to the left, one to the right. So the left one was serving the top floor, and then the right one was serving the ground floor. So for the right one, we had 2 batteries to it. Now also, because we couldn't, you know, parallel the inverters, they didn't have any ports to parallel. It's not an inverter that we could parallel yet. And also, one interesting thing is that it actually had was no longer in production as of the time we're doing the installation. I think they had discontinued that particular model of inverter. So there wasn't so much information online about it, even on the website. I think the brand is, and then on their website, we didn't find any information. So it was just the manual that we had working with. And then it came to the battery, because we were going to be paralleling or 2 batteries together to serve one floor. There was a need to use a bus bar, so that's what's in the middle. So we had a bus bar where we did the configuration of the batteries to it. So positive to one line, then negative to the other line, and then we had the other battery also coming too. So we paralleled the battery, and then as part of that also the battery had a BMS system where you could connect both batteries so they communicate. Unfortunately for the inverter, there wasn't a BMS system a part of it, so you couldn't communicate or have a communication between an inverter with a battery using a communication line. So that was part of what, and these things, solar systems are very interesting. Like I said, it's not a one-way approach to all systems. Usually we'll learn on some of these configurations. Sometimes during the project, you might encounter certain challenges and you have to figure out a way to go about the challenge. As I said, for this, we had two-phase to work with, but the house was a three-phase, and even the kind of two-phase we were working with from the inverter was different from what the house was set up. So we had to, figure out a way to go about all this. And yeah, so we routed our cable, mounted our inverters, installed our breaker boxes. In each breaker box, we had SPD for an array of panels, each array. So for the left breaker box, we had 2 SPDs for 2 arrays of panels. And then also we had a breaker, that is the AC input breaker, which was coming in and then to the inverter. And then we had 2 breakers, DC breakers for the panels. So once the line comes from the panels to the SPD, then from the SPD to the breaker, before from the breaker to the inverter. So for the breaker box, we had 2 SPDs, 1 AC breaker, and then 2 DC breakers, making a total of 5 breakers, or 5 components in one breaker, and then the same for the other breaker as well. So all those cables were routed in the trunking, and then after that did a configuration to the inverters, each inverter having its own set of cables, the same for the other inverter. And then we also had the the panels line coming in to a junction box. So we had a junction box where the panel lines came in, and then we terminated that to an MC4 connectors from the breaker box to that point. Because of the number of cables, it meant we were going to need a lot or a bigger size trunking. The trunking had also already been purchased, so we needed to work with that. Yeah, my son is actually trying to get my attention. Yeah, so that was what we did. And then after all those, we fixed also our breakers for the battery. So because we're doing 2 different set of batteries in this period, even though we had 3 batteries, they were appearing as 2 because 1 dedicated for one inverter and then 2 dedicated for the other inverter with the help of the breaker box. So we had a DC breaker for that set of battery, and then another DC breaker for the other set of battery, and then that was I think 250 amps each of the DC breakers, and those were MCCB. So that's what we use for the batteries. And then after that, we had to bring in the batteries, each that is 15 kilowatts. Yes, and I must say they are actually quite heavy, so we brought that and mounted them, and then we did a configuration of the batteries to the inverter. Yes, so that is the right one, 2 batteries to the right inverter and then 1 battery to the left inverter, and then we configured all the panels and then the moment of truth. So once you're done with the hard part, you now have to turn on the system, make sure everything is configured properly and the rest. So then the system was powered on, and then it was now time to do the configuration. So for the batteries were lithium-ion batteries, 16 cells each. So 15 kilowatts, and another 15. It wasn't exactly 15, it was I think 15.3. So you put everything together, it was like 45.9, almost 46 kilowatts of storage or battery storage. So we did that, and then came to the point where I had to do the configuration on the inverter. So on the inverter, like I was saying, you have configurations such as specifying the exact type of battery you're using. So whether it's gel battery, whether it's a flat battery, whether it's AGM or battery, AMG battery, is AMG or AGM? Whichever. So the type of battery you have to specify that. So for this case, it was lithium battery. And lithium battery have different modes. Some with 15 cells, some with 16 cells, 14 among others. So this one was 16 cells that was specified. So my son is actually coming in. He's coming to worry daddy. Here he comes. Hello. Hello. Hey, how are you? I'm making a video. Can you please excuse me? When I finish, I'll call you, okay?
Yeah, thank you, brother.
I'm making a video.
What is this?
I'm making a video. See, it's a microphone. I'm using it to make a video. See, can you see that? Say hello to the people.
Hello.
Yes, so I'm making a video. When I finish, I'll call you, okay?
I want to do some.
And well, let me finish with this one. When I finish, I'll call you.
I want to come here and do some.
No, let me finish with this one, okay? Please. Please let me finish with this video. When I finish, I'll call you, okay? Okay? I'll call you back, okay? Baby Nine is calling you.
Maybe like, thank you.
Yeah, so I might have to cut this video for this time and then continue later because this man is just, no, don't touch it. Yeah, I'm back. So I was able to finally get him to go so that I can complete this video. So where was I? Yeah, so I was talking about the configuration on the inverter. So on the inverter, you have to specify the type of battery. In this case, this was a lithium-ion battery that we're using. Aside from that, you also have to specify the current at which it charges at. Aside from that, also you have to specify how you want to use the system, the most important part. So for this house, because they already had a grid and they had a solar system as part of it, initially I was proposing they could use the solar system sort of like as a backup power. However, the owner wanted it a different way, in the sense that he wanted that to be the main source of power because he spent quite, a lot of money on the system. So he wanted to enjoy that. So, so as part of the first priority, we had to make the solar panels as first priority in terms of producing power, and then also charging the battery with that. And then the battery was the next priority in terms of providing power. Then the grid was sort of, there to supplement in case there isn't enough, power to charge a battery, rainy days, or maybe at night and the rest. So the grid was sort of like the last option that we had for the system. You could also have an option where you have the grid producing power during the daytime, being supplemented with the solar panels, and then the battery is going to provide power when both of them are not present. That is the grid, and then the panels are not present. And then you can also have an option where the panels produces power being supplemented with the grid, and when the grid is not present, then the panels also not present, then the battery also take over. So these are various configurations that are available, especially when you are using a hybrid system. If you are using just one system, maybe just an on-grid or an off-grid system, which is not a hybrid, you may not have some of these options. And then also for the inverter, there wasn't a BMS, as I said, so there wasn't a way there was going to be a communication between the inverter and the battery. The only way was once you specify that there's a lithium-ion battery and it's maybe a 16 cell, and then also you specify the brand. So some inverters will allow you to specify the brand, then it knows how to go about charging and then discharging, the various batteries. So that was how this whole project went. It took a total of 4 days to do the installation. We had the very first day was to do the assessment. That was on a Monday. We didn't do any installation, so we started the actual installation on the Tuesday. We took off with the panels, also taking off with the inverter, and then Wednesday we went ahead to continue with the inverter installations, especially routing of the cables and the rest. And then the Thursday we completed with that phase, and then we're waiting for the panels to be completed, but unfortunately for the rain, that couldn't be achieved. So on a Friday, the panels were completed. We had power coming from the panels to the inverter. We did the necessary configuration, make sure that the whole system was completed, and yeah, we brought the whole project to a successful completion. So for this project, it was quite a good one. For various projects that we work on, I try my possible best to document them so I can share with you, so you can see videos of the whole system in place. Yes, and yeah, and as part of what we do also, when we try to make it more pleasing in terms of aesthetics, look very nice. So you realize that it took some time to put this together, so it turns out very nice. So if anybody comes to the house and then they bump into the garage and they see the system over there, you know, at least they can admire the system a bit, and maybe through that they may want to have something similar done for them. So this will just be about it for this particular video. You may ask me about cost. Unfortunately, I'm not able to provide a cost for the system because I didn't purchase the materials. The materials were bought, all the materials were bought by the client before we did the installation. So we only charge for labor cost here. So this will be just about it for this video. There'll be another video where I'll be sharing with you an existing solar system that was done by some people, and I was called in to come assess the system to make sure everything was right. And boy, once I went, I discovered quite a number of things which are not so good. So I'll be sharing that with you in a different video so that you get to learn, especially when you're getting somebody to install your solar system for you. You try your possible best to follow keen, you know, through the process to make sure everything is being done right so that you don't have issues with your system. So I'll end this video for now, and I'll see you in the next one.